think the most striking thing in the narrative, and it's quite a long, drawn-out narrative, is that Moses consistently refuses to take on the mission.
Right. And he says, I'm not worthy.
I'm not worthy, and they're not going to believe me. And whatever God says, he basically repudiates.
Yeah.
It's the most extraordinary first meeting between God and a human being. It's not just that he's too modest to take on the role. He's skeptical about everything that God says. It's really almost what you would call chutzpah. It's just, how does one talk to God like that? And it's interesting that, again, in the critiques that you find in the Midrashic tradition, he's not criticized so much for cheek against God as for slandering the people, for being dubious about the people's capacity to believe, to allow themselves to be redeemed. In the end, after a lot of to and fro between God and Moses, the Midrash says it takes 7 days. Until in the end, Moses says, well, send by the hand of anyone you want to send by, so long as it's not me. And at this point, God gets angry, the text says, and says, well, all right, we'll involve Aaron with you. Your brother Aaron will go with you.
Right.
But the detail of God being angry with Moses, I think, is very significant, because it seems, and this is what I would suggest, it seems that Moses, in a very intense way, is representing the problem that God faces in trying to redeem the people. It's not only a problem with Pharaoh. It's not only the persecutor. It's a problem with the people and with Moses, that there is a kind of resistance. There's an unwillingness to open oneself up to an alternative reality. For Moses, it means that he can't speak. That's part of his protest. There's something wrong with his speech.
Right. Slow of speech and slow of tongue in one track.
I think so. I think in the more Kabbalistic kind of Midrashic tradition, there is definitely the sense of God being aroused by human beings, just as human beings are aroused by God. And the word arousal is a very important word about the relationship between God and human beings, but that it's mutual.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's one of the extraordinary recursive references in the story. Over and over again, God says to Moses, Moses says to the people, all this is happening so that you shall tell the story.
Right.
And it's so upside down, you might say. Since it's happened, all right, tell the story. Make sure people remember it. Mm-hmm. But that's not the point. It's not telling the story so as to remember what happened. It happened so as to be the stimulus for a good story, for a meaningful story. And the stories will develop and change through time. And perhaps in the end, you might find yourself telling a better story than what is actually written in the text. So long as there is some connection.
Right.
So that what you have, for instance, on the Seder night, on Passover, is basically the commandment to tell the story of the Exodus, which doesn't mean reading the Bible. It means, it isn't just opening up the Bible and reading.
Yeah.
It's on the basis of this, what's called the Haggadah, the storytelling book, which has a text.
Kind of the order of service. Mm-hmm.
There is a fixed text, but it's supposed to be just a kind of opener for the proliferation of more ideas and more attempts to tell the story in a way that will come closer to what can really affect us. Yes, well, there is one very striking midrash that tries to account for the Egyptian madness, really, in running after them, actually in pursuing them after they have basically thrown them out of the country. And, of course, this is all in the persona of Pharaoh. He is Egypt. He says, what is this we have done in letting them go? It's as if he now thinks letting them go was a crazy idea. What had seemed to be the most sane decision of his life, a few days later he decides was completely irrational. And the Midrash puts it very provocatively and says something like this, that Pharaoh feels that as long as he had the Israelites in his power and God was sending him messages, it's an interesting euphemism for the plagues, that somehow he had some kind of very dramatic and tense relationship with God. He had a feeling that God needed him, that he was important. But now that the people are gone, and life has gone back to normal, the sense of drama has gone, and life is actually quite boring. Now, that sounds very trivial, but there is a sense that Pharaoh has strangely enjoyed being in the eye of the storm.
There are world leaders like that. That's a familiar kind of figure from history.
The very famous parts of the Seder night is the part about the 4 sons. There are 4 different kinds of children who have different ways of approaching this problem of questioning, ranging from the wise son to the one who doesn't know how to ask at all. And obviously we don't think very much of that. Someone who simply doesn't know how to ask a question, that's a problem in terms of autonomy, in terms of freedom.
I think not knowing how to ask a question is far more serious than not having an answer, right?
Yes, absolutely. For me, there's no question. And I think in the Jewish tradition, there is a sense that everything gets moving as a result of a problem, a question. That's what arouses. As soon as you've got, even if you want to call it a complaint, even if it's a rather querulous question, it's still better than no question, because it pushes at the limits of the sort of silent conspiracy of the way things have to be. So there is the wise son and there is the wicked son, and the wicked son asks a very disruptive question, and there's no great enthusiasm about his question, but it's still in the hierarchy of things, it's probably better than the one who doesn't know how to ask at all. And what you have to do with the one who doesn't know how to ask is, it's put very beautifully, v'at petachlo. You, feminine, it's put in the feminine form, you open up for him. You try to stimulate him. You put things in such a way that perhaps that will wake him up. So the emphasis, I think the whole direction is on opening up.
And on using these religious traditions and stories to wake people up also, right?
The stories remain very powerful, as written. And then there is all the amazing cargo of hidden stories that emerges in the Midrashic traditions. And then there is the invitation to the participants to tell their own stories and to ask their own questions and to elaborate further. So there is this sense of infinite elaboration.
There's something about the Passover story itself that lends itself to taking that approach to retelling it and remembering it every year.
Well, I think you can say the question is an expression of desire. If there is a question, then there is a possibility of movement onwards. And when it comes to the themes of liberty, of freedom, then I think questioning is really what motivates, what gets things moving. The strong sense that I don't know everything, that there are things here that I need to know and don't know. And even if one doesn't get a good answer, as you said, simply the activity of framing the question, that already moves one away from a kind of consensus situation.
Plants a longing, doesn't it?
Yes, it's a longing. It's the individual again, the individual who expresses himself in that form, herself, and the sense also of the relationship between the generations. And in a sense, there is always that gap between the generations. The parents, as it were, stand for something. They seem to know it all. The children are the ones who ask the questions. And the children have their problems. They have their criticisms. And this is the moment of freedom.